Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Well, the first thing to say about this is that the topic is actually taken seriously by scholars. I don't mean theologians tucked away in seminaries. I mean historians who are specialists in ancient Palestine. They take this story seriously. Even scholars who don't believe resurrections are possible take the resurrection of Jesus seriously as an historical oddity. And here are the reasons why. Number one, there's no precedent for the belief that someone would be raised to life in time. I know you sometimes hear people say, but there were lots of dying and rising gods in antiquity and Jesus is just another. That's nuts. People who say that aren't historians, and they're quoting people who aren't historians either. The reality is none of those stories from ancient Greek myth and so on have any relevance to the Jesus story. It's so tenuous. There is no precedent. The disciples were not expecting this story, so something had to have caused this story of a risen Jesus to come into existence. The second thing that causes historians to take this seriously is the early date of the claim of the resurrection. We know for a fact the people were claiming that Jesus had been raised to life, not decades later, but almost instantly with the event itself. Our evidence that the disciples within the first few months were claiming to have seen him is overwhelming. So frankly, you don't find serious historians who think the resurrection story was like a developing legend. You know, it could have been a made-up story from the very beginning, but it had to be from the very, very beginning. There are two other really important facts that historians take seriously. Number one, we really do think there was an empty tomb. All the sort of evidence points in that direction. There's multiple testimony to an empty tomb. We know that the early Jerusalem leadership, the opponents of the church, agreed that there was an empty tomb. So this is a real historical puzzle. Very early on, people are claiming to have seen someone alive, and there's an empty tomb. And the last piece of information that historians generally agree on, even historians who don't believe in resurrections, is that the disciples of Jesus thought they had seen him alive. Not only was there an empty tomb, we're very confident that people who were close to him thought they had seen him alive. One of the most sceptical scholars in the world, E.P. Sanders, but a leader in the field, says that the disciples of Jesus had resurrection experiences is, in my judgment, a fact. What explains those experiences, I do not know. This tells you what the responsible historian arrives at as a conclusion. Something very strange did happen. And I think when you put all these data together, no precedent, very early date for the resurrection, empty tomb, and claimed eyewitnesses, if you believe there's a God who's able to raise people from the dead, then you have no problem believing in a resurrection. We have exactly the kind of evidence you would expect if a man really did rise from the dead.